This is the history of the Irish in Kansas City, brought to you by the Irish Roots Cafe, part of our series on the Irish in America from www.irishroots.com.
We have McCormicks and Quinlans and Beatys, and the O'Malleys themselves, of course, hail from County Mayo. Well, you'll never get rich, but you'll never go hungry if you cut hair. And in Donegal town, we held a trial. Largest dress manufacturing company on the face of the planet was to appoint Tom Pendergast as the superintendent of streets. And these are all progenitors of the Kansas City Mafia.
I'm Michael Laughlin, your host. You can reach me with your comments by emailing mike@irishroots.com or by mailing to Box 7575, Kansas City, Missouri, 64116, the old-fashioned way. Phone in your comments to me at 816-256-3360. Please do call in and leave your message. We always look for comments, and you might be able to help us out with a little audio message of your own, letting people know what some of the history in Kansas City is, and for that matter in the Midwest as we expand our episodes. We've gathered together a group of scholars, authors, and everyday Irish to paint you the picture of the history of the Irish in Kansas City. Today we talk with Terrence O'Malley, Episode 8, When Donnelly Became Nelly Don, Irish Barbers, Pendergast Ties to Organized Crime, today at the Irish Roots Cafe. Hey, be sure to drop by the Irish Roots Cafe at irishroots.com when you get a chance. That's where all of our podcasts and all of the books I've written and published over the last 25 years or so can be found. And I'm always looking for another interview for the Irish in Missouri, and for that matter, anywhere in the world, so do keep in touch. And find a book, search for your family tree, or even become a member. It all goes to keep things rolling in the right direction. And you can surely get there from here by going to irishroots.com on the web. And remember to check the show notes for our blog on this episode while you're there. I include extra information each week. And yeah, we're still covering the old Irish families in Kansas City, and their project shows no signs of slowing down. We've got some interviews coming up with yet another O'Malley family after the story of Nelly Don today. And by the way, Nelly Don went to high school, I think it was, with my grandmother Donahue. The only thing I can get out of anybody is that she found it real hard to contact Nelly Don after all the wealth and fortune was made, which makes a lot of sense. And we're going to have Jody Watson coming up here in an issue or so, and Pete Marr and Peter Adams. So keep on listening, and be sure to leave feedback if you can. Let's see, is there anything else to cover here? The book of the week's going to be Nelly Don, A Stitch in Time by our guest today, Terrence Michael O'Malley. And that's about a woman who in 1916 launched an industry that catapulted her to become one of the most wealthy and celebrated women in American business. It's an amazing story, and most people don't really know about it. So the book's one way to learn, and there's going to be an exhibit down at the Irish Museum. And I think there's a few spots on the web where you can catch some information too. But the real deal is here today with our interview. What's been happening around Kansas City? Let's see. Just the other day, July 7th, there was the North American Welsh Choir Concert in KC-Mo. And what else we got here? Of course, the Irish Festival down at Crown Center's coming up August 31 to September the 2nd. And I'll be pulling up stakes and going to the Dublin Irish Festival in Dublin, Ohio August 3 to 5, and probably a little bit before and after. The third annual Kansas City Irish Fest is coming out Saturday, September 1st, and that's something to remember, and that's at the Westin Crown Center Hotel. Going to be a nice competition there, a whole lot of dancers. It'll be worth the trip, and we'll have their website on our show notes, let you know where that is. That's sort of going to be the website of the week, kcfest.com. Now, let me see. That'll do it for today. We've got a long interview, and it's a good interview, and it covers a lot of territory. So be sure to listen to each segment. There's 2 or 3 completely separate topics, and I think you're going to be interested in them all. So now let's start the
my name
interview
is Terrence
with
Michael
Terrence
O'Malley,
Michael O'Malley.
I'm Irish on both sides of my family. We have McCormicks and Quinlans and Beatys. And the O'Malleys themselves, of course, hail from County Mayo.
I've been up there. Have you seen Grace O'Malley's castle up
Grania,
there?
yeah.
Yeah, that's right, the Pirate Queen.
That's right.
She just retired from Broadway, I hear, up in New York.
Well, I had heard that there was a musical about her.
Right, and it ran for a while, and the people liked it. The last review I saw, but the reviewers gave it a little bit of a hard time from what I heard. I don't know.
Oh, okay. Well, I think it would be a great movie. But yeah, that's where the O'Malleys are from, and we, like most of the Irish immigrants, came over during the Great Potato Famine, and of course have slowly been making our way in this country since then. I can tell you this, that my grandfather O'Malley was a barber here in Kansas City.
Oh, how long ago was that? Would have been?
It would have been in the 20s, 30s, 40s, 50s, 60s, and he was one of the earliest tenants on the plaza. And it was very, very neat for my grandfather, who lost his farm as a young man. His parents died young. He inherited this farm with 2 of his siblings, and
that would have been in America.
And it was actually in Iowa. And they lost their farm, and some man told my grandfather, he said, "Well, you'll never get rich, but you'll never go hungry if you cut hair." And so he came to Kansas City, went to barber college, and by the end of his career, he owned 3 barber shops.
Good gosh, what were the name of those shops?
O'Malleys Barber Shops.
So if anybody's been around for a long time, might recognize that name.
Absolutely, especially if they ever were, patrons of the plaza. And it was really neat because my father is a physician here in Kansas City, and for a while his practice was on the plaza. And so you had O'Malleys Barber Shop on the plaza, but then you had O'Malleys medical practice on the plaza too. And I know it made my grandfather real proud to have his son practicing medicine just a couple of blocks away from where he was still cutting hair.
Good God. Now, did your family pass down anything about the town in Mayo they might have been from?
Well, yeah, we're from Westport.
Okay, from Westport. Okay, yes. That's right there. That's right in the heart of the O'Malley country, really.
Yes.
I've been up there, and it's really sort of a planned town, isn't it, compared to the rest?
Compared to the rest of Mayo, it certainly is.
That's right.
I can understand why they left it. I mean, it's a gorgeous area of Ireland, but very rocky. You couldn't really grow a whole lot. It's just north of the Burren.
Right. That's where the O'Loughlin, I'm a Michael Loughlin, and that's where the O'Loughlins come from.
There you go. Which is a gorgeous, rugged country, but not really hospitable toward agrarian activity.
Yeah.
And of course, Clew Bay is where the O'Malleys are from, around that area, and they were great seafarers. They really made their livings off the ocean, fishing,
right.
Basically. Yeah.
Right. Well, there wasn't many options. I tell you what, if you knew the sea, you did well.
Yeah, it was a hard scrabble existence. One of the things, it's kind of interesting things about my family is how tall the men were. My father didn't get the height, but I kind of got the height. And the O'Malleys, for whatever reason, they were tall men. I mean, my great-grandfather was the smallest of like 6 brothers, and he was like almost 6'2".
Very distinctive. I wonder if the Vikings came down and played a role in that.
You have to wonder about that,
And
yes.
I heard the O'Malleys, they came all the way down to Galway in their ships sometimes, and they made alliances with the ferocious O'Flahertys.
Mm-hmm.
And they were known for both being leading families who were doing some fighting against the powers that were trying to move in and take over. Now, did you know, you knew when you were growing up that you were Irish then?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, you can't have a name like O'Malley and, you go and, you're a patron to some store and give them your name and, oh, that's a German name, isn't it? Or,
yeah.
Oh, you must be French.
I had the same story, except I was hanging out with a lot of Italian guys.
Yeah.
And oh, you're Italian. And I'd say my name, and they'd just smile and go, oh, that'd be what? Yeah.
Exactly.
And I didn't quite know exactly what it meant, but I knew it meant I was Irish. How about in the local Irish community? Have you been active there, or how do you find that?
Well, we have been. We were in on the O'Malley. My sect of the family was in on the St. Patty's Day parades when they were revived by Mike Murphy and company, back in the late 70s.
74, it started up again.
Yeah, and we were kind of in on it just a few years later. And God, they were so much fun. We had, very cool floats, and we would actually hand out beers from the floats.
That's right. And I remember when the year they said, nope, they'll no longer be passing anything from the floats. And shortly thereafter, I retired from the parade.
And I believe that was our last parade as well.
Yeah. The whole thing changed, and it got so big, and it's just part of being in a big city. But it sure was nice watching it grow from nothing, wasn't it?
Absolutely. And I got to be a judge of it this year. Of the Irish parade, and that was just pure, unadulterated fun. It was really a great honor, actually, to be asked. Right. And my brother Johnny, who's a circuit court judge here in Kansas City, he also has been a judge of the parade before.
Right. Any relation to the O'Malleys that were up in Weston?
Well, I always tell people that all the O'Malleys come from the same rock in Ireland.
Yeah.
But if you traced us, I would, wager that, there is a connection. Just that, how it is that these Irish families that came over in the mid-19th century were huge. I mean, the family that my great-great-grandfather was, I think, part of, had 9 boys.
Right, and brothers would split and never see each other again.
Yes,
one to California, one to the south. And
Exactly right. But what was interesting growing up, actually, O'Malley was not that common of an Irish name. It's a quintessential Irish name.
But there's not that many in numbers.
There were not growing up. I mean, I see the name now, and like I was just in Manhattan, Kansas, and was disappointed to see that there was an O'Malleys bar there. It just seems like now O'Malleys is almost a cliche.
That's right. They may be using the name and not really have a claim to the bloodline, you think?
Yeah, and I know that there's an O'Malleys in St. Louis, and the people that own it are not named O'Malleys. They just, they like the name. And
I tell you, well, that's the burden you have to bear when you're famous.
You said that right, laddie.
Well, now the latest...
And I had a wonderful experience in Ireland just a couple of years ago.
Yeah?
It's kind of an interesting story, and that is in the early 1960s, my father attended an investment club meeting organized by Maurice McNellis, and he still owned land up in County Donegal on a small little hamlet called Mallinmore, and he needed money basically to pay for tuition at St. Teresa's Academy for his daughters.
Right.
And so my father, on the spot, sight unseen, bought about a not quite 3-acre plat of land in Donegal for $500.
Oh my gosh, goodness gracious,
yeah.
What a deal.
It was a great, at the time it was a fair deal. It was like $250 an acre.
But now.
And literally it was just a donkey cart road to get to this community. And even to this day, there's not even a pub in this community. I mean, it's very remote, very, very isolated, but very beautiful, very gorgeous. I mean, you'd have to have a distinct reason to go there, but once you're there, you realize, wow. I mean, you overlook this, 300-yard vista of 100-foot cliffs with the North Atlantic just crashing in against it.
Yeah.
And it's a very breathtaking, but it's rather inhospitable. And so anyway, he bought it for $500. He paid a one-time lifetime tax on it for $500. And then basically we really didn't do much but visit it over the years, the many members of my family, until I got a call from a real estate agent about 4 or 5 years ago, and he said, well, I've got a buyer for your property if you want to sell it. And I talked with my dad. He said, yeah, let's go ahead and sell it. And then we got sued by some local Irishmen for adverse possession, squatters' rights.
Oh, my God.
So we litigated that case, and my dad and I actually flew over to Ireland, and in Donegal town, we held a trial. over there.
Good gosh.
Yeah, very interesting because, you know, the judges, you still address them as my lord.
Yeah.
And now they have, of course, barristers that are women, and, of course, they are my lady. And they still wear the horsehair wigs in court.
Now, I didn't know that. You know, I hadn't been in court, so I didn't know I thought they would have dumped that.
They have not. And,
oh, my
so
gosh.
It gives it this air of, formality. And
did you think they might say off to the gallows with them?
Well, you know, it was interesting because virtually at least 3/4 of this community showed up for this trial. And the judge was a visiting judge from County Cork, and he says, I don't know who are all these people that are gathered here today. And one of the barristers says, oh, well, Your Honor, they're here to testify. They've never seen the O'Malleys on the property before. So I will be having none of that now. You just tell them to go on home. They don't need to be here. There'll be no testimony from them. And so we went through the proceeding, and very interesting trial, their facts versus our facts. The bottom line is that we had granted their father use of the land for many, many years.
Right.
And they tried to dispute that ever happened. But my father is a very smart man, and he said, well, I remember meeting the daughter back in 1964, and she was studying German, and I had studied German in medical school, and so I remember speaking German to her. And so they put that the daughter was there and she said, and the judge goes, now tell me, were you ever a student of the German language? She goes, yes, I was. But I don't remember meeting Dr. O'Malley. He said, well, then how would he know that you were a student of German? I have no idea, but I don't remember that conversation. And he said, well, I think that, that's just a little too remote that he wouldn't have recalled that, and that he has good credibility and all that stuff. And so, anyway, they gavelled down in our favor. It was very interesting to see Irish justice because they tried 2 tort cases, which are personal injury cases, that same day.
Yeah.
I mean, in America, I'm an attorney, and, it would take us a week to try each one of those cases.
Yeah, boy, you almost think you might see Michelene and John Wayne or Romina Harrow walking down the hall there and getting some real justice.
That's right.
What about this latest project that's really, really caught fire? Everybody's giving you a lot of publicity on it with Nelly Don.
Well, it's one of those deals where I feel like it just has been my honor to get to share the Nelly Don story with people. I feel like it was just lying on the ground, and I came along and gave voice to it.
I think you're right. Yeah, could you share the story briefly with everybody?
Sure. Just imagine this. It's a staggering figure, but Nelly Don made 75 million dresses. Largest dress manufacturing company on the face of the planet. There's never been another company as big as this, and it was begun by Nell, who was of Irish stock. Her father was from County Cork,
Now,
Ireland.
wasn't she a Quinlan?
She was a Quinlan.
And she's got one of your names in common. You think there's any link there?
Oh, well, no, she's my great aunt.
Oh, she is?
My great aunt, yeah.
You didn't even know that?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah,
okay.
no, I'm related to her, and I knew her very well. She was a very sweet lady.
Oh, heck, this is the real deal.
Yeah, and she's my mother's godmother. And she and my grandma grew up like sisters with each other. My grandma was her closest living relative for years, and forever actually. And so we lived the Nelly Don story.
I'll be doggone.
Yeah, my grandfather ran the production for many years at Nelly Don, and basically it was a woman who was 12 to 13 children, who was the recipient of many hand-me-down dresses and clothes from her older sisters, but who just loathed the fact that she had to wear these old, worn-out clothes, and so she started. She had to mend them. She had to redesign them. She also sewed the dresses for her dolls, and so when she graduated from high school and she went to Parsons Business College, she came to Kansas City, and she stayed at a boarding house at age 16, and she fell in love with the guy sitting across from her, a guy named Paul Donnelly, and they got married when Nell was 17. Then she said she wanted to go to college, so she went to Lindenwood College as a married woman in 1907. Very rare in those days.
I'd say, yeah.
And when she came back, she was basically a housewife, during which time she started sewing and designing her own clothes, because the fashion of the era, the everyday clothes that a middle-class woman would wear, were what Nell called 69-cent calico cloth sacks that you could buy at any dry goods store.
And she was right on the point, wasn't she?
She really was. And so Nell is attributed with having invented the house dress. That's what she did. She gave middle-class women beautiful dresses to wear during the day. Not formal evening wear, not necessarily a dress that, although you could, but, not dresses that were primarily intended to go shopping in or to be seen at church in on Sundays, but dresses that you could just wear at virtually any point during the day.
Right. Now, when I used to work down in North Kansas City, there was a Nelly Don, some kind of thing down there in North Kansas City.
1600 North Swift. That was the production headquarters for Nelly Don, but there had been several others before that.
What did they, by that time, which would have been 50s, 60s, 70s, what were they? Was it dress patterns that they'd buy these little cutouts, or what exactly was that? Do you know?
Oh yeah, they were still making dresses.
Okay.
And that's why Nelly Don was in business for 68 years, which, if you think about it, for a clothing line, that's a phenomenally large amount of time. I mean, if you think Yves Saint Laurent or Calvin Klein or some of those people, they haven't been in business for 68 years.
Just a drop in the bucket. They spent no time.
Yeah, and it's because fashions are very, ephemeral and cyclical, and if you don't stay hip and with it, you lose your customer base. But I think primarily the thing about Nelly Don, there's several things, but women don't wear dresses the way they used to.
Is that one of the reasons it ended the dynasty?
Absolutely.
What about the rise of the chain store type thing?
Well, what happened was Nell sold her interest after 40 years of running it single-handedly and growing it to an operation that had, in its later years, about $20 million in sales a year. And employing 1,300 people for 40 years. She sold it in 1956. A consortium of men took it over, and they ran it very well till about 1970. And then some buyers from out of town came in, and they tried to franchise the Nelly Don name by opening up a bunch of outlet stores that sold fabric by the yard. And Nell always thought that was an unwise move because it competed directly with already made dresses, and so it tanked. In 8 years, they drove the company into the ground. They drove a great American company into the ground, and Nelly Don went bankrupt in 1978. And Nell called the Kansas City Star business editor and said, "Send a reporter over here right now. I want it understood that I am not responsible for all those people losing their jobs." She felt very, very responsible for the people that worked underneath her, and she always called the Nelly Don people her family, and they were her family.
That's the way it was back then.
That is the way it was. Now, she also was married to Senator James A. Reed, and in my book, in my documentary, I document how it was that they came together in terms of they had extramarital affairs with each other. Nell announced to the world she was going to go adopt a baby, but instead she went to Chicago and delivered Senator Reed's child. And then 3 months after the child was born, Nell was kidnapped in front of what is now the Toy and Miniature Museum in Kansas City. That was her residence at that moment.
Good God. Who did that?
What Johnny Lazia called some pikers. And what happened was Reed was in Jefferson City trying the famous Ha Ha Tonka lawsuit, which was about the condemnation of the land for the Lake of the Ozarks. And he got a call saying that Nelly Don had been kidnapped. So he went racing out of the courtroom and attracted the attention of reporters, who immediately called their editors in Kansas City, who then called the police, so that by the time Reed got back to Kansas City, he came to the Donnelly residence, and that was Nell's name at the time, Nell Donnelly. That's where you got Nelly Don. You reverse Donnelly and you get Nelly Don.
Well, that's another good old Irish name that goes way back in Kansas City, too.
It does, and
Father
related
Donnelly.
To the bishop, yes.
Oh, yeah.
Yes.
I didn't know that.
Well, anyway, so Reed then realized he had made a mistake in drawing media attention, so he held a news conference, and he said, announced to the kidnappers, please don't harm her, don't hurt her. It's my fault that the word has leaked out, but I'll tell you this, if you harm one hair on her head, I will spend the rest of my days tracking you down and making sure that you get the most severe penalty under the law, which in Missouri is death by hanging. And this was no man to trifle with. Anybody who knew who James A. Reed was, probably the most important politician in Missouri for the first quarter of the 20th century.
Oh, yeah. How's that compared to Pendergast?
Well, it's an interesting tie-in. Well, what happened was, after Reed held this news conference, he went and he called up Johnny Lazia, the reigning mob boss in Kansas City.
Right. And he was part of the Pendergast regime.
He was part of the Pendergast machine. And to be quite honest, if you didn't have James A. Reed, you wouldn't have Pendergast, therefore you wouldn't have Harry Truman, because Reed came to Kansas City after having an affair with a woman in Cedar Rapids, Iowa, who was 17 years older than him. He broke up her marriage, and so to do the honorable thing, he married her, brought her to Kansas City, and started his law practice over again as a young man. And so during the 1890s, he drew the attention of Jim Pendergast because Reed was a vocal opponent to the intolerance groups that were starting to sprout up in Kansas City, basically white Anglo-Saxon Protestant groups who were offended by the various immigrant groups that were making headway into Kansas City.
Part of the power struggle that really started maybe after the Civil War, as the immigrants started to rise.
And the Ku Klux Klan was big in Missouri for the first quarter of the 20th century. It really was.
Right.
And in other states, too, other Midwestern states. And so anyway, Reed spoke up and, berated those who were in favor of the intolerance. And Jim Pendergast liked that. And he sponsored Reed to be Kansas City prosecutor, and then he sponsored Reed to be Kansas City mayor, and he was elected mayor in 1900, and one of his first acts was to appoint Tom Pendergast as the superintendent of streets here in Kansas City. And anybody who knows anything about Kansas City history knows that Tom Pendergast's
ruled the city from
he
small
ruled
positions.
the city, and one of the ways he did it was he had all the paving contracts.
Right.
And so that's where he learned a lot about concrete and paving, was under Jim Reed.
So Jim Reed is really an integral part of the story.
Absolutely, and Tom Pendergast always had a picture of Jim Reed in his office. Tom Pendergast supported Jim Reed's attempts to become president of the United States. Even in 1932, when it was clear that Reed was not going to defeat Roosevelt, Pendergast really was a political genius. He told all of his people, you vote for who you want. I'm sticking by Jim Reed. So at first everybody, if the boss is voting for Reed, we'll have to vote for Reed. And then the second vote came around, a few of them peeled away. Third vote came around, a few more peeled away. And finally, when it became clear that Reed was not going to get the nomination, he basically gave the blessing to Pendergast to go ahead and throw his support behind Roosevelt. So he kept up his good relationship with Jim Reed by remaining loyal to him. And Pendergast just had a bead on things that really was.
And loyalty meant a whole lot to him, I think. At least everybody talks loyalty was
man
something
of his word.
He was, that's right. If he said it, you could count on it.
Now, interestingly enough, one of the, perhaps a critical person, well, definitely a critical person in the downfall of Tom Pendergast, who preferred to go by TJ, was Emmett O'Malley. Emmett O'Malley was the commissioner for the Department of Insurance, and he's the one that approached Pendergast to negotiate the settlement of a fire insurance litigation that had been going on for about 10 years, and there was about $10 million escrowed in this account. And the insurance industry really wanted this case resolved, and so O'Malley and Pendergast conspired to broker the deal where Pendergast would be paid $750,000 for allowing O'Malley through the controlled Governor Guy Park to allow the settlement to go through. So the court gave the settlement its approbation, and Pendergast collected about $330,000 of the $750,000, and so that isn't what was illegal. That was merely negotiating a settlement. There was nothing illegal about it, but poor TJ's downfall was he never declared the income. That's what they got him for in 1939. Was that particular, because they knew him, they had him dead to rights. Tom Pendergast had his fingers in about 32 companies here in Kansas City, many companies, and but his ownership was in a ghost capacity. And what would happen is people would be having a hard time with their company, and they'd come to Tom to bail them out. He'd give them the money to bail them out, and now he'd own a piece of it.
Yeah.
And so he would quietly receive proceeds and profits from many of these companies, but there was no money trail. But with this particular transaction, there was a very solid money trail. And so that's what they got him on. And Tom Pendergast served 1 year and 1 day in Leavenworth Prison. And he served most of the time in the infirmary, where he was a transcriptionist for the doctors as they did the physicals on the prisoners.
Oh, I'll be darned.
Yeah. And then when he came back, he was precluded from visiting 1908 Maine, which is where his headquarters was, and was told to stay out of politics.
And he did.
Yeah, he did. He did.
For real?
They did. They tried to hold a contempt hearing of him, saying that he was still, meeting with his nephew Jim Pendergast, but it never went anywhere. And so, and then he died in 1944. And of course, Truman drew all kinds of headlines when he, was crossing the street, was seen crossing the street, entering into Visitation Catholic Church up there at 52nd and Main, going to Tom Pendergast's funeral. And of course, Truman, being a loyalist the way that Tom was, he didn't care. Said, hey,
That's
he
right.
was my friend. One of the things that Truman said about Pendergast is that he never asked Truman to perform any illegal act. As a matter of fact, Truman was awarding a contract to some non-Pendergast contractors, and so Pendergast called a meeting with Truman and said, well, Harry, they're here because, I want to see if we can get something done on that contract. And Harry said, look, I'll give them the contract if they're the lowest bidders with the highest quality. I mean, if they want the contract. And Pendergast turned to the contractor and said, I told you he was the stubbornest mule you'd ever want to meet, and if that's what he says, then that's the way it is. So Pendergast would never push Truman into doing something illegal. And that was, again, I go back to Pendergast really was of a political genius that you can't appreciate. It goes on and on and on.
He knew where to put pressure and where not.
Well, to give you an example, in 1932, Francis Wilson was going to be the Democratic nominee for governor in Missouri. Well, he died of a heart attack a month before the election. He was from Platte City, and so Pendergast went to his widow and said, well, it's kind of customary for the widow to get to choose who you want. And she said, I want Guy Park. Well, he was a little-known circuit court judge, a very unpolitical person. And Pendergast said, that's who you want? And she said, yeah. And Pendergast looked to him and said, I like Guy Park myself. And so they got Guy Park elected. I mean, this is a man who didn't have any administrative experience. So that at that point, that's when Tom really consolidated his control over the state houses, because he had the governor. Plus, the governor before that had rejected a redistricting plan that the legislature had passed. So in doing that the Republican governor, in doing that, he made it so that every representative in the state had to run statewide. So if you were from Cape Girardeau, you were getting voted on by people in Kansas City. And so that gave Pendergast tremendous power, because people were coming to him from all around the state to beg for his support. And so that's when they used to call it Uncle Tom's Cabin. It really was Uncle. He had the governor, and he had most of the legislators, and he had the congressmen, because it was the same with them too. Their districts had been all broken up too, and so
it was a collaborative administration. Though he had contacts everywhere, and they all worked together. It wasn't like just for him.
Right.
It was political.
Right. But Tom's great downfall is that he was, clearly today we would have characterized as a gambling addict.
Right.
And he gambled literally millions of dollars away. He was known as one of the biggest suckers in all of horse racing. And as a result of that, Tom needed cash all the time.
And that got him into trouble.
That gets him into trouble because not only is Tom getting cash from all of these various companies in which he has a small ownership interest, but he's also getting cash that is collected from the illegal operations in Kansas City, the houses of prostitution, the gambling joints, any type of vice that is going on in Kansas City. Tom is having, Johnny Lazia is collecting it for him and then remitting it to Tom. And then after Lazia was killed over on Armour Boulevard, he was assassinated in 1934, a guy named Charles Corolla. And these are all progenitors of the Kansas City Mafia. Charles Corolla collected what was called the lug for Pendergast and remitted to Pendergast every month, large amounts of cash. And Tom used that for his gambling.
Yep, and there went the reputation that could have been a really good man, could have gone down in history as somebody who really did something to help save the city during hard times.
Yeah, and absolutely, you will hear those defenders of what is called Pendergastism say, if you only concentrate on the nefarious aspects of boss rule, you'll never appreciate what a philanthropic and generous human being he was on a personal level. He employed many people. They had a system here in Kansas City where they didn't use heavy machinery, because a heavy machine might replace 10 people on a job. They'd rather just give the guys picks and shovels and let them go dig the stuff, just so they have something to do during the day and they can bring home some money to their families. And he built the municipal auditorium. He built the police headquarters. He built Jackson County courthouse. He paved Brush Creek. He, for better or worse, he built the municipal building in Kansas City, and also with Harry Truman as the administrative judge of Jackson County, they built something like 240 miles of roads here in Kansas City. So they really modernized this city. They really, and that's why Pendergast was able to sustain the control that he had, was people saw things getting done.
Right. There were a lot of things were happening. It was good. Overall, that part was good.
Yes, absolutely.
Now, before we run out of time, going back to that name Donnelly, you said that was related to the Bishop Donnelly?
Yes, that Paul Donnelly, Nell's first husband, whom she divorced in 1932, she gave him $1 million and told him to go away. He was related. Paul Donnelly was from St. Louis, and his relatives were related to Bishop Donnelly.
So they all came from County Cavan originally, it sounds like.
Yes, that would be right. So very, very Irish family. And the Reeds, and then what happened was, after Nell divorced Donnelly, and just prior to that, James A. Reed's first wife died, the one that he had an affair with, who was 17 years older than he was. She died. And so on December 13th, 1933, Reed and Nell held a Christmas dinner party and asked all their guests to rise and bear witness to their nuptials given by a federal judge right there on the spot. And that just shocked the bejesus out of everybody. And so Nell was married to James A. Reed for the next 11 years until he passed away in 1944.
Boy, I tell you, very few people sort of starting to know about Father Donnelly, who did so much to employ people and build the city with his brick factories. And here, Nell Donnelly, the name anyway, is still there. It played such a role. It's really interesting on what one family name meant to early Kansas City.
Well, it is.
Now, what about going into the future? Are you planning another little book on Kansas City?
Well, I am. I am right now working on a 2-part documentary film, which I call Black Hand Straw Man, which is about the history of organized crime in Kansas City. I'm taking it all the way from the extortionary periods of when the early mafia came to Kansas City, and of course integrating.
What year would have that been?
Well, the Black Hand extortion started in about 1909 in Little Italy in Kansas City.
Okay.
And and so that's where you get the Black Hand part of it, and then Strawman is the code name that the FBI gave to the investigation and prosecution of the skimming that was going on out of Kansas City in Las Vegas with the Savella family.
Yeah, that was big.
Yes,
big. I remember that.
Huge, right. And there's plenty of organized crime in between the two. Fascinating history. It's a history that connects Kansas City to so many different organizations and families in America, through America. And what's kind of unusual is Kansas City being a moderately sized city. I mean, it's a big city, but obviously not as big as some others, but had a very efficient mafia here. It was relatively small, but it was very well run. It was very organized, very tightly controlled, and it was very well respected around the rest of the country because they knew that, the mob bosses here in Kansas City really had it together. And basically your major mob bosses here in Kansas City were Johnny Lazia, Charles Bonaggio, and Nick Savella, with many associates and lieutenants and things of that.
Any Irish names ever filter into there?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. And of course, I go back to Emmett O'Malley being one of the principals that was integrated with Pendergast.
What about Machine Gun Kelly? Didn't he pass through here once or twice?
Machine Gun Kelly. He had a connect. He kidnapped a guy named Urschel, out of Oklahoma. He was an Oklahoma oil millionaire, and some of the money that was paid in that kidnapping was had made its way through Kansas City. Kansas City was mobster heaven in the 1930s. Pretty Boy Floyd came through here.
A lot of people come here to cool off from action.
because it was a controlled town because of Tom and Lazia. As long as you didn't come here and cause... And what the deal is, if you were a major criminal and you wanted to come to Kansas City, you had to pay tribute to Johnny Lazia, and then he would keep the cops off your back. And it's fascinating to go into the history and see that they deliberately paid policemen very poorly in Kansas City so that they would take bribes.
They had to live off the extra money on the side.
Right.
Yeah. And,
right.
Of course, the policemen, a lot of them were Irish.
Yeah, to say the least, yeah.
Well, can anybody help you with anything you're doing now? Should they contact you, or do you prefer to remain anonymous?
No, I don't. I mean, that's the way that a person who produces documentaries gets those little jewel stories. If anybody has had any brushes with organized crime in Kansas City, I'm very interested in talking with them. Now, I'm only taking the story up through about 1985 after the last strawman prosecution. I'm not interested in delving into what the status of things are today. I don't even know if there's organized crime in Kansas City today, to be quite frank. But I'm looking for visuals, too, if they're relatives.
There's a lot of pictures hanging out in family homes.
Yes,
and
absolutely.
Passed down to grandsons.
Yeah, and now is the time to tell the story. I know that some... people don't want to, perpetuate a stigma, and others may be embarrassed about their family history. But so much time has passed now that...
And the key is it is part of the past, and we can learn from the past.
Absolutely. It's true, bona fide history. It's history that has contributed to the color and character of Kansas City. It's important history that we need to know, and now is the time really to share it and, embrace it for what it is.
Great. Do you have an email address they can contact you at? Or
sure. I'm at O'Malley, TOMALLEY at everestkc.net.
Great. And there's also a webpage for
Nelly Don. Yes, you can. There's a DVD available of the video at nellydon.com. That's NELLYDON.com. And there's also a book. It's interesting. I made the film, and then Pat O'Neill saw the film, put his arm around me, and said, "Hey, that is a really good movie. Now write the book."
Yeah.
And so I took 2 years to do the film. I took about 2 months to do the book, but I already had my research done.
Well, in the Irish Museum down there, they've got some of your Nelly Don things. It's helping them out. So.
Absolutely. They're going to have a 12 to 14-week display of Nelly Don dresses. They're beautiful, gorgeous dresses, and that's Nell's great legacy is the dresses. The film was the longest-running film in Kansas City last year. It's the highest-grossing film that Screenland Theater has ever seen there.
Pretty darn good.
Yeah, so it's been a fun project, I'll say that much.
But the O'Malley name survives and is doing well in Kansas City today.
I said that's right, laddie.
Yes, indeed. Well, it's been a pleasure meeting you here. Anything you want to sign off with?
No, I just want to hope everybody who's listening to this will perhaps check out nellydon.com and then look forward to Black Hand Strawman.
Great, will do. I'll be sure to put a little bit of note in the show notes and put some of those addresses down so people can get to them if they want to in writing. And I hope you have a good time the rest of the day here at the festival. And
well, they're serving beer, aren't they?
I know. You were trying to climb up on the stand there a while ago, weren't you? The red hair contest, but you didn't have the red hair.
Well, no, my wife does. She's right there.
That's right. And I thought she might win, but she decided to defer.
Well, I now know where my daughter gets her shyness from.
Okay, great to see you, Terrence.
All right, thank you.
Well, that's all, folks. Be sure to come back next week for our next episode of the Irish in Kansas City, part of the Irish in America series. And reach me anytime at irishroots.com, where you can find all of our books and podcasts. And be sure to check the show notes for this episode on our webpage. Donations and comments are welcome, and a big thank you to all of our members who make all these podcasts and books possible. Until next time we meet here, right where Ireland met Kansas City, at the Irish Roots Cafe.